Hello, everyone. It's a beautiful day, and we're here with Lucian Slosh. Is it? How do you say your last name?
It's a hard one. Schloss.
Schloss. Okay, Schloss. It's
Yeah. But
Schloss.
it's a lot of shushes like Lucian Schloss. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, Lucian Schloss. No, that's actually I have to practice saying that. Anyways,
Yeah.
that's okay. We and I met Lucian years ago at a NORWAC conference, and we sat next to each other and had a great talk. And it turns out that you are a psychotherapist, and you kind of mix astrology and psychotherapy. So tell us about your work. What are you currently working on?
Yeah. I, like many people, caught the astrology bug, right? When I went to grad school, it was at CIIS and Richard Tarnas had just come out with his book, Cosmos and Psyche, and I took a week long deep dive into that with him, and it kind of blew my mind. Um, I mean, previous to that, I'd been into Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy, which is kind of, I mean, Steiner incorporates astrology to a certain extent in his work. Um, and then Yeah, so and then I around 2015, 16, I met Mark Jones and kind of studied with him and became friends with him. And he told me I was living in Portland and he told me to go to Norwalk, and that's when I met you. And
Hmm.
um, I no longer live on the West Coast, but Norwalk was amazing.
Yeah,
Um,
I really want to read Cosmos and Psyche. Honestly, that's like on my bucket list. So maybe I should
yeah,
get that on book on tape or something.
it
Uh,
is like it's the book I give, because it's totally changed when I first would started therapy. I kind of hid that I was into astrology, like even in 2009, 2010. And then like very slowly I started letting people like, oh, can I look at your chart? And now it's like people find me and they're like, oh, you're into astrology. Like, can you please look at kind
oh
of
wow.
everybody. But whenever there's people who are, really doubt it or poo-poo it, I challenge them to read Cosmos and Psyche. And if they still think there's nothing to astrology, um, then I guess they win. I don't know. I don't
Uh,
think any
oh
should
my
read it,
God.
but
Now I know what to do with
yeah,
another thing to do with skeptics is have them read Cosmos and Psyche.
have him read Cosmos and Psyche. Rick Tarnas's brain is like he just hits all the requirements for those who need the kind of I think when you're looking at the outer planet transits like that and the archetypes, you just can't argue with the kind of like, oh, that's a perfect archetypal description of that period of time in human history. And you see it repeat, three or four times, and it's like, oh, undeniable
Hmm,
kind of in
interesting.
that way. So,
Well, sh-
but we wanted to talk about family constellation. So around the same time, um, that I found that I when I was at CIS, there was also someone there who offered a family constellation workshop. Um, and at the time, the man, he was German, who did the constellation workshop, told me that the only place to get trained in it was in Europe. So I kind of just like let go of that idea. And in around 2016, found out that there was a woman, Jane Peterson in Portland, Oregon, who has a training in this work. And I dove in, and that kind of became and has stayed my obsession,
oh,
along with astrology is still an obsession as well, too.
yeah.
Um,
So what is family constellation work? There's a lot of students at the school who I'm sure are really curious what it is.
yeah, so family constellations, I'll kind of start with the theory and then we'll talk about the practice because they're both pretty unique. Um, so the theory, so it was started by a guy named Bert Hellinger, who was born at the time, I think it was like the Austrian-Hungarian border. And he was born, I think, in 1926. or so, and was raised Catholic and was like a really pious kid and knew from an early age that he wanted to be a priest. Um, and then the Nazis took over,
Hmm.
and he was part of the resistance and was caught as a uh, teenager. And instead of they didn't send Catholics to to the camps, they would send them to the front lines. So he uh, got sent to the front lines, got taken as a prisoner of war for 2 years. And while he was a prisoner of war, uh, uh, and perhaps the question had come up for him earlier, just seeing his neighbors and country turn to Nazism. He had this question of like, how did good people do evil things, or how did good people do awful things, and if people do it in good conscience, right? So it was really this like bigger question of how can you do this and feel innocent, and other people do things and feel, you know, guilty. And as a Catholic, to him, he had always assumed that, you know, uh, Christians are good, non-Christians are, evil. Like, these kind of like just like these assumptions. Or if you look at history, how many people have done atrocious things in the name of Christianity or things like that. Um, So, and what he saw was that I believe it was the Russians who took him as prisoner of war. Uh, Maybe it was the British. I'm not quite sure there either. But they were treating not the Nazis in a clean they were torturing them and killing them um, with a total clean conscience because they were Nazis.
Hmm.
You know.
Wow.
Uh, so Um, then he became a priest. He did become a priest, and he went to South Africa as a missionary, and worked in an area where the Zulu people were, and even was the headmaster of a school there. And there's some controversy in that a lot of people now like to claim that he stole this kind of method and this way of thinking from the Zulus,
Wow.
um, which there's not a lot of evidence of. But what he does talk about is the one thing that really touched him um, about the Zulu people is that they would never ever say anything bad about their parents or grandparents or elders in the community, right? That there was this very like honoring where you get your life from was more important to
Wow.
them
That's
than what
cool.
they thought about people. So that made a big impact on him.
Wow.
And
Yeah, because in
I
our
believe
culture, people are just blaming their parents for everything. Like, I actually have a video called "Not Your Mother's Astrology" where I basically say, "Stop blaming your mom. Look at your chart." Like Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue has set people on fires in elevators and then blame his mom. He's like, "It's because my mom took me to my grandparents' house." I'm like, "No, it's your 19th degree, which has like
right,
5 planets, you maniac."
yeah. Well, so we'll get there because that this is a big part of psychotherapy really since Freud has been kind of on this mission to kind of like who's to blame for our psychological problems, right? Which is
Right.
um really really quite interesting. And Bert Hellinger later said that he believes one of the main causes of depression in people is actually a rejection of their parents. That by rejecting your parents, uh, doesn't matter what they did to you. They could have been Adolf Hitler or anything like that, but not giving them a place or excluding the acknowledgement that they are the only parents and therefore the right parents for oneself,
Wow.
right?
Interesting.
That basically, and what you experience in family constellation workshops is a little bit like, let's say trauma and really bad psychological self-help kind of belief structures. Let's say like Jupiterian beliefs gone wrong, where it's like, I'm my own person and I'll do whatever I want. And, you know,
Yeah.
versus the like Saturnian reality of like, no matter how hard I try, um, on some foundational level, I am a marriage between my mother and my father and their families. Um, so so right around I'll speak a little astrology right around, I believe, his kind of midlife Uranus opposition time. He leaves the Catholic Church for a similar reason, in that he realizes that the church is that the conscience is all wrong there, and decides to become a psychoanalyst. And so leaves the priest. I think the church, leaves being a priest, becomes a psychoanalyst in Vienna. Um, Gets into primal scream therapy. I mean, he becomes this kind of like really kind of radical psychotherapist
Uh-huh.
during that time. And when you hear accounts of people from back then, like, he always left an impression on people. Um, and eventually in the 70s and 80s gets more into group dynamics and family systems work, and uh, starts offering these workshops, um, where at the time a popular thing to do in these family therapy workshops was, you pick people to represent your different family members, and then you set them up in like a sculpture, right, using space and sometimes psychodrama, and saying like, okay, you're gonna represent my mother, Andrea, and she was really strict and angry, and give a list of characterizations that you're then gonna dramatize.
Right.
And somehow along the way, he started noticing that, if he didn't say quite as much about the characterizations, people would start to pick up on sensations, feelings, thoughts that were not theirs, right? So that's where the kind of method started, which is, if you go to a family constellation workshop, you talk about whatever your issue is. It could be physical symptoms, it could be having the problems in your relationship, or you have a sick kid or something like that. And then the facilitator will listen, hear about what happened in your family history, things like that, and ask you to pick people to represent uh, the different elements of the system. And you can do this with planets, you can do this with
That
inner
reminds me
parts
of
of self.
astrodrama. Isn't that astrodrama where they do that, where they have people play your planets, and then this seems like that. It's cool.
Yeah,
Well, it's cool because in teleology, which is what we study at the school a lot, is
yeah,
there's four influences on a growing creature. So there's like your genetics, your
yeah,
culture, and your family history, your climate you're growing in, and then the chart. So it's like you could analyze, you could be helping us analyze people from, well, we have their genetics, and but then their family dynamics layer. Then we could also look at the astrodrama layer. But it sounds like you
yeah.
explode these things and help people really process these layers.
Yeah. So that's the method, and what we actually, it's basically a type of mediumship. And at first, Hellinger kind of wanted to stay in the realm of psychotherapy, and then over the course of time got more and more. It was actually really into, you're probably familiar with this, Aristotle's, like, nous, or he ended up calling them spirit mind constellations. So
Okay.
he actually stopped all talking and just would set people up, and this kind of people would start to experience all kinds of things and in their body and stuff like that. So
Yeah, nous is
um,
just for everyone listening. Nous is a Greek word for a certain kind of the mind or the part of the mind. It's nous, and it's a there's different parts of the mind according to the Greeks, and this was one of them.
right. So he translates it into spirit mind or something like
Okay.
that. Like this the ultimate kind of that there's some movement from the beginning of time towards a kind of synthesis and wholeness, right? That everything, if you kind of remove the kind of lower ego from the picture and open up to this greater force, it moves towards this um very much like Jung's idea of individuation, right? Like that things tend towards wholeness, synthesis, and
Wow,
this
that's
kind of
cool.
emerging evolution.
Wow.
So, taking a step back, um, so he starts developing this, uh, and he was very into phenomenology, right? Which is kind of this like letting the phenomena speak rather than implementing the theory onto the phenomenon, right? So, um, and that's where a lot of he claims, and I can vouch for it, that you see this kind of stuff over and over again, is that's where a lot of this theory came from. So um, what he discovered uh, was a couple things. The big discovery, in a way, is around conscience, and he realized that there's kind of three layers. He distinguishes these kind of three layers of conscience. So there's the personal conscience, which is, I'm gonna vote Democratic, and because I think they're good, and um, if I have an affair, because I'm in a monogamous relationship, um, I'm gonna feel guilty, right? Or like
Really?
that's what we're conscious of our personal conscience.
Hmm.
And then what he discovered is that there's more of an unconscious conscience, which he called the systemic conscience. And that works in these kind of mysterious ways where even if you consciously um, don't like your father or even hate your father because he was an alcoholic, and you might choose to never drink alcohol, you will find another way. Maybe you won't thrive in with money, right? Maybe you'll struggle to survive your whole life. And in that way, you're obeying this family systemic conscience, right? It's this if I go out of the systemic conscience, then I feel guilty, and if I stay in it, I feel innocent.
Mm.
Um,
So does the
and this
family constellation work kind of unpack this stuff?
Yes, absolutely. And that's where you're looking for what he called these kind of entanglements, these transgenerational traumas and entanglements.
Mm.
Um, and we'll get more into that. And then he did talk about a third conscience, which he called the greater conscience. And that is kind of almost this Taoist spirit mind, kind of like almost beyond morality, of like this kind of greater spirit that does seem to move towards, um, allows us to step beyond the confines of these other consciences to some degree, or conscience. Um, so out of what he then noticed is that he calls them the orders of love in this systemic conscience that work in families. So conscience isn't really good or bad. It just is kind of um, an organ that allows us to belong to our different social groups. But the orders are kind of like hard facts, right? And I'll explain the orders and try to give some quick examples. But So what he called the orders of love in families. And you see these in businesses to some degree as well, and in any system. But the first order is belonging, right? So if you do what supports belonging in a group, you feel innocent. And if you do that which could exclude you, you will feel you experience as guilt, right? So and this, especially for young children, just intuitively um, are connected to this order. Um, the thing he found with the systemic conscience is that if anybody's excluded, so let's say you have an uncle who's a murderer or a rapist or something like that, and you exclude him, you don't invite him. You know, I think of like the Sleeping Beauty or something, or Rumpelstiltskin. It's like this is in fairy tales all the time. It's like the demon or the devil is always the one who's excluded and tried to be cut out of the system.
Mm.
And often what happens is that someone more vulnerable, often children or grandchildren or great grandchildren, will kind of unconsciously take on representing that excluded member of the family. One area he saw this a lot with is like um, adopted children, aborted children, um, that you know, and this is not a moral judgment on something like abortion, right? Like for Bert Hellinger, none of this is about good and bad. It's really about acknowledging what is. So you take the example of an abortion, and um, we have, and I've seen this with clients, no matter how much you want to say it's just a couple of cells put together, or it's not really a human soul yet. What we find in constellations is not so much that the parents are bad for getting an abortion or whatever, but that the aborted child needs to be acknowledged as belonging in the system as a child, and also that there's a social order. So if you see this all the time where, most parents don't talk to their children about abortions they had before or after them. But what you see in a constellation, for example, is when someone realizes that they were maybe the firstborn, but the second child, it has a kind of energetic
Wow.
rightness to it,
Wow.
right?
But
Uh,
anyone who's in the Ensoulment study group is tripping right now because like that whole book's about how the soul gets in the body and like what it does and like the visions it
yeah,
sees,
yeah,
all the stuff. Like you're kind of talking to that crew right now, so that's really
absolutely. So, and he calls this the family soul, right? Meaning, um, uh, you know, so talking about these exclusions. So, who are the people that need to be included in your personal constellation, right? So, your siblings, both dead and alive, abortions, miscarriages, um, any any um significant relationship that your parents or grandparents had before or after your parent or grandparent, right? So in other words, my dad was married two times before my mother, right? And
cool.
even though I didn't grow up around these women, they had an impact in they belong to the family soul, especially if you create life together, right? So if there's other children involved, so half siblings, those sorts of things.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but when you do
Yeah,
chart readings, do you ever do chart readings for people and kind of unpack their family dynamic layer in the chart reading?
you know, I am not, you'd think based on my interests of like family constellation, psychotherapy, and family constellations that I would have done a lot more of that.
Uh-huh.
But I haven't done it. I haven't done a ton of that. I do have to say though, what I see consistently, and this makes you see people become parents with big Saturn transits, like Saturn returns, or they become grandparents at their second Saturn return, or that sort of stuff. So then you see the sign placements, but I also see a lot of, and I'm sure you have much more experience than me with this. I see a ton of like Saturn in a particular house placement just over and over and over again in family systems, you know.
Interesting. Interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
So wait, now
Uh,
you do constellation. So you do constellation work with people in person mainly where you're at, right? You don't do
yeah,
any.
I do. I offer online constellations occasionally, but I do workshops once a month because you can do it. So, for example, you can even use different objects. Like I'll do it with a client and I'll have them use random objects just on their desk. And, it's really this, and you'll appreciate this too, I think, with the ensoulment stuff, but physical space is somehow so deeply connected to astral or psychic space, right? So that actually setting up a physical constellation of any system, right?
Uh-huh.
Like I could place this for you and I could place this for me and then kind of tune in to it. And you always get kind of intuitive, energetic information that seems obvious, right? Even the way we talk about relationships is using spatial terms, right?
Wow.
I I feel like you really see me, or I feel like you don't see me, right?
Interesting.
You turned your back on me, you know.
Yeah.
I feel like you feel so distant, right? Or I've never felt this close to anybody, right?
Wow.
Like these are all spatial terms, right? So like whatever this matrix of the physical world and the soul world, there's some kind of marriage that happens when we really tune into um, this kind of spatial dimension.
Yeah. Interesting.
Um, and there's infinite information there.
Yeah.
Um,
So how can
yeah.
people find you? Because, well, first of all, I want to say this is just our like first introduction to
Yeah.
you to the student body, and it's like, maybe if people are interested in talking to you or getting to know your work more or whatever, they can comment on this video that we're posting. They can also we
Yeah.
can also talk to you on the Facebook page, but I would like to get you matriculated into the school a little bit more. We were going to offer a class, but we switched to this video a little bit just to get you introduced because what I find is the students, once they get to know somebody, then they're more likely to like go to a class
Yeah.
like that. But how would you like the students to interface with you? Like, what if you were going to be at
Oh,
school, what would you do?
oh. Um, well, definitely I have taught and although I don't have a lot of signups for it currently, I'm supposed to be teaching an online, like every other week, 2 hours course on the orders of love, which we just tapped on. I I just have to say the two other orders are equilibrium between giving and taking,
Mhm,
except with children, right? Parents give and children take, and
mhm,
should not go the other way around. Otherwise, that's parentification, right? Like life flows in one direction.
mhm,
And the way you pay your parents back for life is by doing something creative with your life or passing the life on in some way through children or something like that.
mhm,
It's a very existential thing.
mhm,
Um, second, the third one is the order of time and precedence. So like, who came first in the system, who came second. Like I work with lots of couples. I'll just give one example because this is really juicy. Is these days and age you see so many blended families, right? Where there's a child from a previous partnership and maybe nobody likes the previous partner, right? Maybe they were abusive or narcissistic or whatever it is. Um, but it's still important to acknowledge them as part of the family and that you know, that they came first and their loss was your gain. So let's say you're the second wife or the second husband.
Wow.
Somewhere from your soul, you have to say, regardless what happened, regardless what I think of you, you came first. You
Hmm.
know, you had this child together, and your loss was my gain,
Interesting.
right? So anyway, that's a kind of example.
Well,
So
okay. Okay, so how can people find you?
yes. So they can find me. I'll maybe you can put my email, honestly. I am a licensed therapist in Oregon, New York, and Massachusetts. I can see astrology and constellation clients anywhere. Um, I so my email, Lucian Schloss at gmail.com, Facebook, Lucian Schloss. And if I'll also give you a link for my Eventbrite page where I post my workshops and things. Um, and then, like I said, I'm offering a course on understanding the orders of love and these systemic principles that you can apply either to your life or to your work with clients. And
Nice.
it's all based on the primary book, which is called Love's Hidden Symmetry, um, which is a by Bert Hellinger, which is what an amazing title, right? Love's
Yeah.
Hidden Symmetry.
Well, okay, so let's take this video and let's, as we wrap it up here, say to the students, if we want to have a resident psychotherapist who's, because we have like a historian at the school, Philip, and
Yeah,
it would be nice to have a psychotherapist who's kind of like our psychology and astrology person. So
right.
students are watching this and you guys are into the psychological layer. Why don't you make yourselves known to me and Lucian,
Right.
show up on Facebook or make a comment so that we know where to find you, and then we can decide if we can maybe like have some psychology class at the
I
school.
could also offer a Zoom constellation, right? So
Okay.
that wouldn't so much be a class, but where, um, you know, if we get a group of people together on Zoom, we can do a piece of work for someone, and
Okay.
that's a pretty wild experience too.
Okay,
So
so let's use this video to rally people and be like, all right, if you're
yes,
watching this video and you saw Lucian and you like what you heard, because like I love Lucian, I can't
right.
I can't personally rally students for psychology, but if you're interested in psychology and astrology, make yourself known and Lucian and I will get to you. Does that sound
Yeah,
good?
yeah. Sounds really good.
All right, well, thank
Yeah,
you so much for meeting me. I'm sorry that it didn't work out to
it's
have a
okay.
class, but that's we're just a tiny school. We're growing like this. So,
Yes, yes.
all
This
right,
is
well,
fun.
all right, well, have a wonderful
Whatever
day.
comes of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's
Take
just the
care.
beginning. This is just the
Yes.
beginning video.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, have a good one.
Okay. Take care, Andrea.